My name is Fiona Bruce. We met some years ago now when you came and conducted one of your Commission of Inquiry sessions in the House of Lords about, gosh,
I
6 years
remember
ago.
that very well. And I remember your commitment to the rights of the people of North Korea, and I thank you and Lord Alton and all the other members of the British Parliament. It's very reassuring, and we need it, and we hope it's going to be reviving in interest and concern.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And before we go on, I would like to just, if I may, mention some of the people who have joined us today. You will know some of them. Lord Alton, you've already mentioned, and my colleague David Burrows, a long-serving member of the All-Party Group. Ben Rogers, you may have heard of him. And then we have Ewelina Ocha, who's doing a great deal of work currently, particularly focusing on concerns about genocide. Joanne Moore of Christian Solidarity Worldwide has helped administer today's event. And we have Timothy Cho with us, who originates from North Korea and spent a year in my office here in Parliament as an intern a couple of years ago. So we have some really knowledgeable people here regarding the concerns that we want to discuss with you today. But we are truly privileged and thankful to you for joining us at this all-party parliamentary group meeting from the other side of the world. It's 8:30 in the morning here, Michael. What time is it with you?
It's just after 7:30 at night.
Marvelous.
And so I've just arrived home from a long day at work, and I had a big molar tooth extracted this morning, which is not a nice procedure. However, I'm feeling okay, and so, but my way of celebrating is to join the all-parliamentary group in talking about a decayed molar of the international community that needs to be dealt with quickly.
Well, thank you. Our hearts are with you, and our gratitude for staying with us and being committed to this appointment. I will, if I may, Michael, before we start, just clarify for the record that the reason we want to meet with you is that the All-Party Parliamentary Group is conducting an inquiry. We're just starting now on human rights violations in North Korea between 2014 and 2020. In other words, developments since your very detailed and very respected report, the UN Commission of Inquiry report of 2014. We are aware that contained very many issues which are still very live, if I can call it that. And we want to ensure that both the UK government and the international community remain alive themselves to these concerns. And so our aim is to update it, if we can call it that. We're very aware that yours was, if you like, an official report, and we're an all-party parliamentary group, so we're not actually part of the UK government, but we're in a privileged position to be able to submit reports to ministers, and they do respond to us, and they will meet with us. So our aim is to identify concerns since your report and hopefully recommendations for the UK government on how to engage on this issue further. Our hearts go out to the people of North Korea, and our focus has always been the human rights violations in the country. And so we thank you for coming today, Michael. There are a number of colleagues with us who will have questions to ask, but before I continue, may I just, for the record, formally introduce you so that we're all aware of those who aren't of your professional background. Would that be in order? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Michael is an eminent jurist. When he retired from the High Court of Australia on the 2nd of February 2009, Michael was Australia's longest serving judge. He was appointed to the High Court of Australia in 1996 and he served 13 years. In later years, he was acting Chief Justice of Australia twice. And in 2013-14, he was appointed chair of the UN Commission of Inquiry on human rights violations in North Korea. Now that report, and I recall, Michael, that you travelled the world taking evidence and including, as I say, to come here to the Houses of Parliament in the UK. But obviously it was a very detailed and substantial report, and I will just, if I may, quote just a couple of sentences from it, which really don't do it justice. These words have been repeated many times, including in this House since. It concluded that systematic, widespread and gross human rights violations have been and are being committed in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, its institutions and officials. In many instances, the violations of human rights found by your Commission constitute crimes against humanity. The gravity, scale and nature of these violations reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. Thank you so much for what you did then and for being with us today. And if I may, I will start with the question to you and then I'll hand over questions to others. Would that be in order, Michael?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my first question, our first question is, how did North Korea and the international community respond to the Commission of Inquiry?
The international community responded with great concern, even alarm, because we used a different model in gathering testimony and preparing and producing our report. It isn't too much to say that when the report was delivered in March 2014 to the Commission, the Council on Human Rights, it caused something of a sensation. That was because the report on virtually every page has quotations from people of North Korea, many of whom escaped through China into South Korea, others of whom went to other countries, including some to the United Kingdom, whom we interviewed in the Commission of Inquiry during the course of our investigations. The fact that we did the inquiry in the manner that is familiar to English-speaking people, by public hearings, by going out and inviting people affected, inviting the media, responding to public concern, to scholars and others, was something different in UN reports, which do tend to follow the civilian approach of dealing with matters in a relatively secret administrative way, and not in the public way in which your committee is conducting the present inquiry, and in which in Australia and other English-speaking democracies we tend to do it. Up front, in the open, involving witnesses, and the witness testimonies spoke truth to power in the United Nations and in the world, and that gathered a lot of interest. It resulted in votes in the Human Rights Council, in the General Assembly, and ultimately referring the matter to the Security Council, which were extremely strong votes. And they indicated a deep concern in the United Nations system for what we had revealed. There were some countries which could generally be expected to be either hostile to or certainly not supporting of the report. But they were a very small number, no more than 20, and they were the usual countries each time: the Russian Federation, Cuba, the People's Republic of China, Venezuela, and Cuba, I've mentioned, Laos, and other countries which were hostile to the human rights investigations. And that was the span of differences, but the fact that the General Assembly received it, the fact that the General Assembly accepted our recommendation and referred the report to the Security Council, and the fact that the Security Council accepted that reference, put it on its agenda, and it is still on the agenda of the Security Council, that's very unusual in the UN system. And that is where things stood when President Trump initiated quite a different strategy, having started his presidency with strong attacks on North Korea and calling Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader, Little Rocket Man. He very soon afterwards formed the view that he should make an attempt at discussion to get a deal. This is what he said he would try to do. And he went ahead and he met the supreme leader in Singapore, and he met again in Hanoi. That was not a successful meeting in Hanoi. He met informally in the demilitarized zone, and at none of those meetings did he ever refer to human rights. It was the view of the Commission of Inquiry that certainly the issues of nuclear weapons and the dangers of nuclear weapons are major concerns of the international community, and they include concerns of a human rights character. But there will be no peace on the Korean Peninsula while so long as the international community does not deal with the issues of human rights. And that is why I strongly welcome the decision of the All-Party Parliamentary Committee to revive the interests of the United Kingdom and to pursue this. And I believe that in the change of administration in the United States, this is a very timely development, and I hope it will lead on to closer cooperation between the United Kingdom, the United States, and other countries. And the possibility of that happening was illustrated by a very strong statement which was issued by Germany only a week ago in the Security Council. Germany had the support of Belgium, Estonia, France, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, Japan, and the Dominican Republic in making a strong appeal for a revival of concern and interest in human rights. And if that statement is not available to the committee, I will make sure that it reaches members of the committee. It is a wonderful thing to have lived long enough to see Germany taking such an important and strong stand on human rights, and they took the lead in this statement, and it deserves support.
Well, thank you very much for that very full answer to my question. I'm going to now pass, if I may, to Lord Alton for the next question.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and good evening to you, Michael. I'm very sorry to hear about your molar and your extraction, but you seem to be on very good form nonetheless. Thank you. Coming into Parliament this morning, I was reading, thanks to Ben actually, who drew it to my attention, an article from this morning's Guardian newspaper about the Uyghur crisis. And it's been written by Ephraim Mervis, the chief rabbi, who quotes Elie Wiesel at the beginning of the article, who says, "Whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. Very powerful statement. And in many respects, what you did in the run-up to the 2014 publication was to provide us with a witness statement so that we could no longer say we didn't know. And I'm certain that when the historians come to record these times, rather like the way in which we look back now at Solzhenitsyn and Nathan Sharansky and some of the great figures from the Soviet era, those who spoke out and provided evidence and witness statements are the ones we now go back to and say, well, we did know about these things. And of course, it resulted in many ways in the Helsinki process that put together, as you have just done, those two pillars, one the security issues and the other human rights. And as you know, that was the founding principle of the all-party parliamentary group. And it's wonderful that the group continues, though it's sad that we still have to in many ways. In your report, Michael, you say that this is a state without parallel, and you draw the comparisons with the Reich and the terrible things that were done during that time. And you conclude that these are crimes against humanity. And although I agree with you that it was good to see the response of individual countries, and it's good that there is some revival of interest, not least in the Human Rights Council, in the Security Council, the threat, the ever-present threat, particularly of a Chinese veto, of a reference, as you recommend, to the International Criminal Court, is still one of the unresolved issues, I think, of our times, of how you crank up the judicial mechanisms internationally to ensure that serious allegations of the kind that you adumbrate in the report are investigated and acted upon. So I was pleased to hear what you just said about some of the changes that are perhaps occurring in both in the Human Rights Council, but perhaps also the new administration in the White House, how that might change the dynamics. But also, if you could say a word about South Korea as well, because President Moon, only yesterday, an appeal was made, as you probably know, by dozens of human rights organizations and individuals. I was one of the signatories to the letter, urging the Republic of Korea to be more outspoken about human rights violations and to end the silence that there has been. I mean, if any country on earth is a witness and has seen the statements, it's surely from some of the nearly 30,000 people who have fled from North Korea, now living in the Republic of Korea, and who, like Timothy, who's on this call, and who was tortured in North Korea, are able to tell us firsthand what they experienced. So, you know, my question to you is, how are we going to break the logjam? How are we going to get a judicial mechanism internationally to actually function if there's always going to be a veto? Is it time to create our own independent judicial tribunal, for instance, sitting in the region, made up of democratic countries outside of the normal UN mechanisms? I mean, what's your wise advice in taking this forward? Because we will be wanting to make recommendations to the UK government about the best ways to break the logjam and to make some of these things, not just shine a light on them, not just to say it all over again, these are the terrible things that are happening, but this is the way that we must put the international community itself in the dock and say, you must act on this and start doing something significant.
Well, first of all, I would like to pay respects and a tribute to you, David, for your faithful pursuit of issues, not just in North Korea, but in many other troubled areas of the world. And it's the concerned citizens and leaders who continue to give voice to these terrible atrocities that keep the matter alive and keep it before the attention of the international community. It is true that in the aftermath of the Second World War and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Charter of the United Nations Assembly, which named universal human rights as one of the three pillars of the new body, there were great expectations that things would get better. And in fact, by the Genocide Convention and other international law of 1948 and the UDHR of December of 48, there was effectively a promise that the world would not repeat the errors of the 1930s and 40s, that it would not look away, that it would not ignore terrible atrocities. I have to say to you that one of the abiding memories I have of the North Korea inquiry was that of sitting in Seoul, in Tokyo, in London, in Washington, sitting there and hearing the testimony, because I'm old enough to have studied the Nuremberg trials and to have read about them and to have read Professor Philippe Sands' wonderful book on the origins of crimes against humanity and genocide, to know how all that developed and how full of hope the international community was. And it was just as if I had been parachuted back to those times. And here I was hearing a believable and truthful, as we thought, testimony by people telling us of what they'd been through. And some of the statements particularly of the detention camps and the 3 generations of Korean people who were from the north who was put into those camps because of suspicion that they were not loyal to the regime, and terrible treatment of women who had conceived children on their escape routes into China. Terrible experiences of young Koreans in the north who were forced regularly to witness public executions, the entrapment of people and hostage taking and the taking of people from Japan to North Korea and from other countries. I mean, this was a really shocking experience for me to go through. But we did what we could. We recorded the statements. They remain on the record. They remain an imperative of the United Nations. And I think we are going to see a difference. The person named by President-elect Biden to be the Secretary of State, Mr. Tony Blinken, a very experienced diplomat, is a person who has a strong record in human rights. And I don't believe he will go to or could go to a meeting with North Korea's leader or representatives of North Korea and not mention the issue of human rights. It was as if it was erased. It was like the post-Soviet era after Stalin, that there was the erasure of any reference to Beria. Well, this was the erasure of any reference to the crimes against humanity and shocking human rights offences that we found. Now, how do we break the logjam? I'm afraid that is something that has to be left to wiser political minds, because it's essentially a political judgment. But I don't think you should surrender on the possibility that action will come out of getting the matter into the Security Council. One thing that impresses an ordinary human being when they sit in that beautiful room in New York with the horseshoe table, and you see collected in that room 15 human beings who have the responsibility, the ultimate responsibility for peace and stability in the world. And when things come up and get on the table, there is a lot of pressure. Propinquity is very important in international affairs, and being together puts pressure to get some action that will address these issues. Now, China has a very large, long border with DPRK. The Russian Federation has a border with DPRK. They all know how dangerous it will be if the nuclear weapons that have been developed in the last decade or so in DPRK fall into the wrong hands or give rise to further developments and proliferation. So all of these are developments which I think mean that we cannot assume either that the Russian Federation, which used to be the main financial supporter of DPRK, but has not been since 1989, and China, which became the main supporter, they must have really serious security concerns of their own. And I think you may find that there are commonalities between China, Russia, and other countries that indicate that there will be a point where they will require action to be taken. And that point will be reached where they see that that is in their interests and the interests of their people to protect them from the danger of nuclear weapons and from the hemorrhage into their countries of large numbers of people seeking to escape from DPRK. So remember always that Russia and the Chinese representatives agreed to sanctions. They agreed to, and they imposed them. And until about the time of President Trump's move, substantially, according to The Economist, which is a source of very reliable information on the China-North Korea border, the result was that the sanctions were enforced and increased, and I think it should not be given away. I believe there will be, if the matter goes back to the Security Council and is considered there, rational minds will come to bear on what on earth they can do. Because the bottom line is, if we cannot contain the great dangers of the horrible concoction of nuclear weapons and a grim and violent abuse of human rights, if we cannot contain that in the case of North Korea, then it's going to be a major challenge in many other states that I won't mention, but which will present enacted in the Republic of Korea. And therefore that will go before the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Korea. That is a very strong court. Remember, that was the court which unanimously removed President Park Geun-hye, who was the last president of the Republic of Korea before President Moon Jae-in. So it's a strong court of independent judges, and it's a convention in the international judicial circles that you don't move into other judges' territory before they've had a chance to deal with the matter themselves. And so I don't want to deal with that, though I'm watching it with great anxiety, of course.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael and David. We're listening. I can tell everyone is with rapt attention to all that you are saying. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn now, if I may, firstly to David Burrows, who is in fact heading up our inquiry, and I know you spoke with him recently. And then after that to Ben Rogers. So David.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a privilege to meet you again, and the joys of this remote to connect with you across the waters. It's wonderful. What we're finding and observing, I'm observing a distance from Parliament, but nevertheless seeing from the current parliamentary concern is we are really in a place of marginal interest of crimes against humanity, not just involving but other areas as well, is being taken seriously. What was a marginal interest, not least particularly those present who are taking up a mainstream interest of other parliamentarians. And so, as we move to production of the report in the new year, really seeing this as a vital test case, as you said, to shine a light on other criminal states and such abuse of human rights. What also the case, you've mentioned previously, timing with the coming the presidency of Joe Biden. I just wonder whether you'd be able to go out from our purpose with our call out to the UK government as they set their relationship with the US and wider areas of human rights. What you particularly encourage us to be looking to encourage the government to find a way multilaterally and ensure that this is all taken much more seriously?
I believe that with the advent of the Biden administration, the relationship which has existed in the past until quite recently, constructive relationship of like-minded, like-thinking support, particularly between the United Kingdom and the United States, will be revived. I mean, my own recollection was many times visiting the State Department in Washington, meeting the very brilliant, thoughtful, informed, and experienced people who served in that department. And unfortunately, Mr. Trump took the view that they were part of the Washington swamp and didn't really utilize them to the extent that could and should have been done. I was myself not opposed to the initiative that Donald Trump established of trying another tack, because he was no doubt thinking of the very same questions as Lord Alton asked me. I mean, how does one deal with this logjam? And at the time he took his initiative of seeking to have a meeting, I thought, well, so long as he adheres to the principles, it may be that his unconventional way of going about things might actually deliver some good outcomes. But when one analyses it, he went in, did not appear to be well prepared, did not pursue the strategy of dealing with security issues in the way that it had been done, with insistence on the permanent and unreversible removal of nuclear weapons. And the net result of it is that with the failure of his strategy, but with the expansion of the nuclear weapons and missiles, we're actually in a worse position. And that worse position has been increased in its horror by the withdrawal of the United States from a number of non-proliferation treaties, which I think the all-party committee should keep its eye on. I mean, this issue of North Korea, unfortunately, has to be considered very much in the context of the problem of nuclear proliferation, which doesn't get as much attention in the international community and the political community as it should, but which is a truly urgent issue because of its threat, its existential threat to humanity. So what is going to happen? I think we have to wait and see how the Biden administration works out. By all appearances, it seems to be he has formed an administration that seems to be not extreme in any way. It seems to be seeking to get back to a policy-oriented and well-informed agenda for peace and for human rights. And if that is so, then that is ready-made for the influence and cooperation and support and assistance of the United Kingdom, which has such a strong record for international human rights, certainly in recent years, and under governments of different political persuasions. So I would be reasonably optimistic. Some people would say being optimistic in the case of North Korea is an error in naivety. And it may well be that will be proved to be so. But President Obama said famously, quoting, I think it was Lincoln, that the arc of history bends towards liberty and human rights. And if we can increase the knowledge of the people of North Korea through the BBC and through international media about how uniquely isolated their country is, because they are fed constantly, day by day, a diet of misinformation and a lot of evidence of violence and cruelty. So I think the BBC did revive the Korean program. I hope that is continuing, and I think the committee would do well to consider giving support to the BBC's Korea language program, because although there are jammers and although there is interference, the Korean people, we must remember, are amongst the most brilliant people in digital technology. It's been demonstrated in South Korea by the development of the iPhones and the digital equipment, and it's been demonstrated, sadly, in North Korea by the development in isolation of nuclear weapons and missile delivery systems. It's fair to say that no one expected that North Korea would develop its missile delivery systems as quickly as it has done. And that has been done because they have had the talent to do it. And therefore, if you can get messages of information and news into North Korea, I think that will be very important for freedom and human rights in North Korea. And that is no doubt why the government of DPRK has sought to stop that information, including information about the report of the Commission of Inquiry getting into North Korea. So if you could turn your mind to how you can get that into North Korea, bearing in mind the laws in South Korea, but those laws in South Korea won't really influence what can happen in international communications. And I think that is a line that should be addressed, and I hope the committee will address it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that that response and that suggestion. If I can just say that very much through Lord Alton's leading, the all-party group did spend some time, I think possibly 2 or 3 years, pressing the BBC to start to broadcast again in North Korea. I'm sure others were doing the same, and we were delighted when they did so. I'm not saying that we always think that the material is quite what we would like to see, but at least it is some broadcasting. And the other thing, Michael, which might encourage you, is that in our all-party parliamentary groups over recent years, we've had a number of witnesses who've come to talk to us about how through often tiny electronic devices, information has been got into North Korea over recent years through the development of technology. So you're absolutely right. It is a way that we can reach the country and the people there and must encourage. Thank you. Can I turn now to Ben, who I know will have at least one, if not many questions. Ben Rogers, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Fiona. It's a privilege to be with you, and Michael, a privilege to see and hear you again. One of the dangers of following Fiona, Lord Alton and David Burrows is that actually they have asked and you have addressed in your own very substantive remarks many of the questions that I was going to ask. But I wonder if I could ask a question that sort of builds on that and weaves some of the points together and also injects a new dimension. And it's around the question of how to achieve the balance, if there is a balance to be achieved, between engagement and pressure. And I'm thinking of that in regard to, you've already talked about the Trump administration's attempts to engage Kim Jong-un, but without putting human rights on the table. That was clearly a failure. And I remember David Hawke's report many years ago that argued for a combination of the two, but that does put human rights at the center. And I wonder if that's still viable. But I also asked the question in regard to South Korea, not in regard to the domestic situation in South Korea, but in terms of how to encourage South Korea to resume the leadership role that it did play at the United Nations on the human rights situation. And then thirdly, in regard to China, at a time when, as you've said, China's role in relation to North Korea is so important, and yet at the same time, the tensions between China and the free world, for all sorts of reasons, not least in your own country, are escalating. How do we meaningfully engage with China on North Korea, whilst maintaining our other concerns about China? But if I can just inject into all of that a new dimension, and that's the question of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what does that mean for this combination of engagement and pressure? Does it open up possibility of new engagement because of the global interest and concern about the pandemic, or does it further seal off North Korea and make it even more difficult to meaningfully engage? So a number of strands there, but around that whole question of the balance of engagement and pressure.
Well, as usual, Ben, you've come up with a lot of very important issues, and they would take a very long time to answer adequately. If I look back on the conduct of the Commission of Inquiry, there are very many things of which I'm proud, and in particular, the public hearings, the involvement, the use of the detainees and the escapees, and I think that was a very good strategy and should be used more often by the United Nations. Napoleon had many great benefits in his lawmaking and codification and so on, but open, transparent administration was not one of the strong suits of the late emperor, and our system is much more open. It goes back to medieval times in England of being more transparent and insisting that the courts were more transparent. And so I think our doing it that way was very good. But one area of failure, looking back on it, I would say, was our failure to engage with the then opposition in South Korea. That wasn't through lack of effort or invitations or trying. It was difficult to get them to come to our events. And I think there was a sort of ideological division. I had met President Kim Dae-jung, a very great man and a great fighter for liberty and human rights. And he was on the opposition side and worked for the opening up of the so-called sunshine policy and so on. But we tried to reach out and get them on board and to be participating. But North Korea, like Australia, plays its politics very hard. I'm sure in the United Kingdom everything is much more cosy and friendly, but in Australia and in North Korea, and in South Korea, it's very hardball. And so we didn't really succeed. And the price of it now is that a lot of the issues that we were pursuing are currently, for a time, out of favour in South Korea. But it may be that with the new administration in the United States, with the historic long-term and close association between the United States and the Republic of Korea, that may be going to break and change in South Korea. I'm hoping that will happen and that will open up possibilities. Politicians everywhere are realists, and they will face the realities of the major superpower taking a new direction, and I would hope that that's going to lead to a greater engagement of South Korea with the issues of human rights in North Korea. After all, President Moon Jae-in was a considerable human rights lawyer, and he was a person who had a record of fighting for workers' rights and other rights. So I hope that is going to happen, and that's going to lead to a revival, because they will be working in a new paradigm, which will be where the script of the drama is being significantly presented by the United States of America. And I believe that they will adjust to the new situation, and that will provide opportunities, respectful of humanitarian assistance, respectful of the economic, social and cultural rights, not just civil and political rights, but nonetheless, if countries like the United Kingdom and France and Germany are nuanced in dealing with the concerns of South Korea. When I would go there, even in the period of the Park administration, they would all say to me, "You must understand that our relatives are on the other side of the border. Our families are there. We have not been able to see our grandparents or our uncles, and that itself is a shameful and shocking breach of human rights." So I can understand the anxiety to try a new gesture, but it didn't make any progress. And the plain fact has to be stated: the only progress ever made in dealing with the DPRK is made by the imposition of pressure by United Nations sanctions. Sanctions imposed with the supporting vote of all the permanent 5 members of the United Nations, because of the deep concern about the security issues and the possibility of large numbers of people fleeing from North Korea to escape. Now, you raise a very important issue in respect of COVID-19, because there are many reports about the so-called policies of North Korea in dealing with COVID-19. And one of the reports was that they were going to be in the forefront of providing the vaccine to their citizens. I saw a report yesterday that the diplomats from the Russian mission in North Korea said that they thought that was very doubtful, they said, because they didn't think that they were giving priority to that issue. But as you would know, they blamed COVID-19 for the murder of an official from South Korea who strayed into their waters, and he was simply killed allegedly because of the risk of COVID-19 escaping, which is a very paltry and unconvincing reason. My hope is that Mr. Biden, who's had a lot of experience dealing with issues of international law, will understand and will be briefed that the only language North Korea believes is and pays attention to and is worried and fearful about is the language of the International Security Council security requirements, and those resolutions have to be defended and kept in place, and hopefully enhanced with proper humanitarian exceptions, but in order to impose pressure on North Korea. They do not pay attention to language, reason, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They go along and they pretend that they are a human rights observant country, but they're not. And they're not observant because observing those human rights would possibly endanger their political existence. And so these are the realities of North Korea, and I hope that the United Kingdom, which is a P5 country, will responsibly use its power in the Security Council, which it tends to deploy very sensibly and rationally, and that it will do so in a way that supports freedom and human rights in North Korea by imposing pressure on the administration in North Korea, which is unpopular with the people of North Korea because they can't enjoy the white goods and other products which they see on the smuggled popular programs that come in from South Korea.
Well, thank you, Michael, and very grateful to you again for addressing so many complex questions. We're very conscious of your time, and we just have literally just under 5 minutes to go before we conclude, because I'm conscious you must get back to nursing your molar. But we have 2 short questions now to close, and I'm going to take them together. The first one is from Timothy Cho, and then straight on to Ewelina Ochab. So Timothy, first of all.
Thank you, Fiona. And thank you, Mr. Kirby. It's a privilege to meet with you online. Although I greeted you via email through Ben's introduction, and I can't wait. And honestly, I can't really wait to meet you someday physically. Hopefully, we'll be in Australia or even in London. As you can imagine, I must have tons of questions, but I have only one question I can ask you with this opportunity. And I escaped 16 years ago from North Korea, and I escaped for survival. And over the past 16 years, the escapees and North Korean people are still escaping even today for the same reasons. And at the same time, I am so grateful to all of international committees and governments and activists and politicians, the language of human rights in North Korea that has become so broadly and now recognized, particularly your report, UN Commission of Inquiry report, has brought this work so broadly. So we are now international cooperation in this work of continual campaigning and for North Korea's human rights issues. And just 2 weeks ago, North Korea passed another legislation called reactionary thought, and which they tried to block every single of information entry to North Korea from outside. And simultaneously, what's been happening in South Korea's new legislation again addressed this is going to crime anyone who is going to send USB or leaflet or promotional pamphlet, anything that is come from outside. So what it means, we have very narrow platforms now. When I say we, particularly I am here highlighting North Korean escapees. There are only about 40,000 North Korean escapees across the world, include myself, where I am now settled down in the UK. And with these narrow platforms, yet we are very hopeful because we have people like you, and also I am very grateful to APPG and North Korea's work on this inquiry, which will make a new kind of way to break through that, this current dark time on the Korean Peninsula. And so my question is quite simple here to ask you, what are your thoughts on 40,000 North Korean escapees in democratic countries? How we can cooperate, how we can further continue work on this. But it means I'm also asking for your thoughts of any kind of production can we predict in the next 10, 15 years. That is my hope, and that's why I am here standing and against the regime where I all things personally had experienced and witnessed living in North Korea during my escape 4 times imprisonment until I got my life here. But I am looking forward to go back to this country when the moment it comes.
Yes, well, I also look forward to the day when you can go back to the north of Korea, and when the Korean people are united, and when there are universal human rights. Every country has human rights problems. My own country, Australia, has human rights problems, often in dealing with refugees and with other such issues. But crimes against humanity are human rights problems of a special and serious and dramatic kind, and they demand action. Now, I spoke earlier about the problems that are being presented by initiatives that have been taken by President Moon Jae-in and his administration. My own belief is that it is likely that those actions may come into conflict with the policies of the new United States administration. If there's one thing Americans like to talk endlessly about, it's the First Amendment, and it's the right of people to express their point of view, even if you disagree with it. And therefore, I think it's very likely that the new administration of the United States is going to probably express much more strongly than I could properly do its concern about preventing people who have escaped from North Korea telling their fellow citizens, including those in North Korea, how exceptional and horrible and shocking the government in that country is. A crime against humanity is defined as a crime of violence by the state that shocks the conscience of humankind. And that is a very stiff test, but we found in the Commission of Inquiry that it is constantly established in North Korea. So what I suggest you do is to try to turn your intelligence and experience into ways that it will be possible, hopefully within the law in South Korea as it is finally understood by the Constitutional Court, but that you will turn your attention to ways in which you can bring to the notice of your fellow Koreans in North Korea what human rights requires in their country. And a good place for you to start would be the report of the Commission of Inquiry, because that sets out all the steps that we thought needed to be done in order to bring North Korea into conformity with the United Nations human rights. Koreans are very talented with digital technology, and people of your age must find ways to get the knowledge about the United Nations and its work into North Korea, because North Korea will not let the United Nations come in and will try to stop the report of the Commission of Inquiry coming in. They have a right to know what the Commission of Inquiry says, and people of your age have an obligation to try, including through the BBC, to get knowledge about the Commission of Inquiry into the minds of the people of North Korea. because knowledge is power, and knowledge will lead to changes in North Korea that will be in the direction of universal human rights.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time in answering these questions.
You said there was another question. Do we have time?
We're conscious. We're so conscious of your time. Ewelina was going to email it, but if you're kind enough to take it very quickly, she can be very short, she says.
Good. Quick question, quick answer.
Yes, thank you very much. So, of course, there are challenges at the UN Security Council, including possible veto from Russia and China. If there, for example, if there was a resolution to refer the situation to the ICC or establish an ad hoc tribunal. But from your engagements with General Assembly, and you mentioned that there were approximately 20 states that were hostile to the report, do you think that there would be an appetite for a mechanism similar to the IIIM that was established for Syria, some mechanism to collect, preserve the evidence of the atrocities in Syria, but something similar for North Korea, established at the General Assembly?
It's interesting that you should mention that, because one of the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea was that there should be established a field office in Seoul, which would continue the work of the Commission of Inquiry and would continue to gather the testimony of witnesses, so that there would be a history of this period for future generations and for the present generation. That has been done in Cambodia in respect of the Khmer Rouge, and we made that recommendation. That recommendation was adopted by the United Nations, and the commission, the field office has been established in Seoul. It has continued faithfully to receive and collect the testimony of people who have escaped from North Korea into South Korea, and it is constantly collecting all of this information, and that will be part of the history of the Korean people when eventually, not too long to go, I hope, when eventually human rights returns to the whole of the Korean peninsula. So something has been done. I'm not sure that the Syrian model, which I don't know about, would be a better model, but in the meantime, the field office has been established. It has very talented and hard-working, though relatively few, United Nations employees, and it is collecting this testimony, and that will become part of the history of the people of Korea when North Korea has ceased to exist, and it will cease to exist. Korea will be united, and it will be united under the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, including universal human rights, peace and security, and economic equity and humanitarian assistance to one another.
Well, Michael, that is a wonderful note to end our meeting. Can I, on behalf of everyone, extend our huge thanks to you for giving us your time today, particularly under the circumstances that you've been labouring under. You've been a friend to our all-party group for some considerable time, and you've demonstrated that again today, and a friend whose contribution and input we value so greatly. The breadth, the depth of the responses you've given us today will inform our inquiry going forward. You've made many suggestions that will help us as we move on in our inquiry, having further meetings and witness sessions. But this first one to launch this inquiry, we are indebted to you. Thank you so much, and may you have a restful evening and night and feel very much refreshed in the morning. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.